Hello viewers, Will Underwood here from Gambling Insider. I'm here with Šimon Vincze from Casino Guru. We're here to talk a little bit more about RG today. And Šimon, you've had a few last minute changes. So your panel explored a variety of RG topics. So I was going to ask you about sort of maybe what those last minute changes were, because I think you were supposed to be doing something slightly different, and then how you just generally reflect on the panel that you did end up doing today.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. So the change was, initially I was gonna be part of the so-called Oxford discussion, which name is responsible gambling bad for your business? And the narrative that was supposed to be there was like, what are the negative aspects, or what could be the negative effects of responsible gambling on your commercial success? And it has changed because, as that being an Oxford debate, it has to have an opposing overview, and I guess it might be difficult to find someone who would be coming from this standpoint and talk about this. But ultimately, I think it is a shame because, especially in the offshore markets or in the traditional understanding of responsible gambling, there is still quite big prevalence of seeing responsible gambling as going to the opposite direction than the commercial successes. And I think that there are some points which are at least viable and for discussion and should be discussed, because these are real concerns which people who are doing business in these areas are concerning, and these could be the reasons for them why they wouldn't embrace responsible gambling or some parts of responsible and safer gambling into their business, specifically mentioning player behavior tools, monitoring and interaction with them. So I think that it would be an interesting discussion.
If there was no regulation for operators to sort of follow, do you still think that they would take up their own RG initiatives off their own sort of back, or do you feel as though that maybe wouldn't be something that would happen, and if so, why?
Okay, that's actually a very good question, because I think the regulation is very helpful in this, and I think that regulation was and still is a main driver which is making changes in the responsible gambling. Because when you think about it from the commercial perspective, it is quite often about stopping someone to spend more money with you. And traditionally it's been seen like, this is an adult, the person is spending their money or the money they got from whatever source, and I'm just accepting them because they want to gamble with me. So I think it is a result of the regulation, but also it is the result of a changes that has arrived, and specifically changes with an increase of online gambling, and naturally also with increase of prevalence or with increase of discussion around the problem gambling and gambling related harm. So I think that there are different or more stakeholders which are there to be sort of responsible for this. But to answer your question, I think it would be a lot slower if it would be just on the operator's hands, because ultimately where we are at the moment is the narrative: you should embrace safer gambling as an operator, you should embrace duty of care, because then you will have a healthy database of players who will be spending money with you for a long run. They would be entertained, they would be aware of the risks, so everybody would be happy. But I think it's very difficult to believe in this from the position of the operator who is not forced to do it. Like, it makes sense, but where is the commercial proof of it? And to this note, I would be happy to see more proofs of this, of more or more sharing of the commercial data from the operators who are embracing this sort of strategy, showing that it works, showing that even though the earnings or the commercial capacity has decreased at the beginning, we were able to get on a stable line of gaining profit, and now we are in a position when we can rely on retention and we do not need to invest that much in an acquisition, and we are a satisfied company which is earning money.
And I believe the panel that you ended up moderating was to do with where does the responsibility lie? Whose responsibility is it? I suppose something that I think gets asked in a lot of different industries which fall under the same protection sort of narrative that gambling does, and I'll get onto that in a little bit. They kind of think about the same question, whose responsibility is it? How much responsibility do you believe can realistically be placed on the players who perhaps struggle with issues like addiction? Do you believe that it is more on the operator's side, or is it more of a 50-50 split? What are your opinions there?
So I think that when you talk about responsibility to do something about it, or perhaps the responsibility to do the initial step, I think the operators, or perhaps a little bit broader societal group of players, of like key stakeholders in it, are responsible, because at least from this initial experience, when players have no idea what they are going into, we can hardly talk about responsibility from their side. But when we go furthermore in this journey, it ultimately falls down to players to decide whether they are going to be paying attention to the risks which are involved in gambling, whether they are going to pay attention where they are gambling or with whom they are gambling. I'm talking about the locally licensed market versus the offshore market, because you can create the safest environment possible, but if it's not going to be embraced by the players, they would decide to just go around it and do what they like. So when we talk about the responsibility on decreasing gambling harm, or responsibility to embrace responsible gambling from the player side, it is a very important topic, but it's more about creating ways on how to motivate these players, how to educate them, and how to get them into a position so they would see it as a normal thing. I am gambling, I should be taking an interest about the risks of gambling. What should I do in order to avoid it? What could happen to me? And like I said, have it as a normal thing. To set up a limit, to if you need to, put yourself off for the weekends, and then not to perceive it as something which is connected just with a small part of population which you really do not want to be part of. And it is our job as the industry to create this environment and to nudge players towards this. And from my perspective, it is the most important thing to do.
And I suppose something that I was also thinking about in terms of advertising especially, there are other forms of recreational activity that can be harmful but are still legal, similar to gambling, such as, indulgence like alcohol, cigarettes. How much do you think, maybe in terms of advertising, that our industry could learn from the protection initiatives that are placed in those industries?
So the gambling, especially online gambling, has one major disadvantage when you compare it with alcohol and cigarettes, and it is that if the customers wouldn't like what you offer them locally, they could easily find the better offer or the offer they like somewhere else on the internet. The options are there. And the other thing is that one of the main effects of advertising on gambling is that you are able to channel your players from your country into your licensed offer. And if this ability is not available, that doesn't mean that there is not going to be any advertisement for gambling, because all these opportunities outside of your jurisdiction, this offshore gambling, they would most probably find their ways on how to get their offers, their brands in front of the eyes of the people who might be interested in gambling. So I'm not sure if there is much to learn. I think that also it is fair to mention that when you compare gambling with alcohol and cigarettes, almost all consumption of alcohol and all consumption of cigarettes is bad for you, as opposed with gambling that not all gambling is always harmful to you. So I think these differences might be evident.
And just to round it out with a final question, and thank you very much for joining us today again. I think there's a lot of people who maybe believe that cut and dry RG can be bad for operators on the bottom line in terms of profitability. I was wondering if you believe that from a long-term perspective, it is just simply beneficial for everybody involved, if actually looking at it from long term, it is better for the bottom line for operators to, make sure that they do push these RG initiatives?
I think that it is, ultimately, because there is no way back. When I am talking with people and also listening to panels, they quite often talk about evolution. So how the industry, how the online gambling market or global online gambling is evolving. And I think there is no way back. It will be just increased. The requirements are going to be increasing more and more. More and more countries are going to be regulated their own gambling. So I think eventually any gray market will disappear, and it will be only the white market or the black market, which I think is going to make the life of those operating from offshore more tougher. I'm not sure if it's not gonna go away, but yes, I think the sooner the operators which mean it seriously, the sooner they start implementing these safer gambling principles on their bottom line, including the monitoring of player behavior and interaction with players, not only with those who are struggling, but having the interaction with players as a common thing, as a common part of the gambling journey of the players. I think sooner they start is better for them, because there is no way back.
Simon, thank you very much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your show.